Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
We are joined in the studio now by a man who does not have a working class accent. Barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm not bad, mate. You all right? Nice to hear you, as they say. It's always a joy. It's a joy to be back.
Good to have you on board. So, a couple of legal stories from which I think we can benefit from your expertise. Now, this is going massive all over the world on social media, and it is indeed an intriguing saga. We're talking about the sort of smash hit real-life Hollywood drama that is this volcanic feud between the actress Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Baldoni starred in and directed a film called It Ends With Us. It's actually about domestic violence. And the co-star was the actress Blake Lively. She's married to Ryan Reynolds. Now, after this film, Blake Lively went public and sort of accused Baldoni of sexually harassing her and behaving in an unacceptable way on the set. Baldoni says it's outrageous. You know, how dare you taint my reputation like this? So they've been swapping sort of nasty words in public for some time. Well, the latest twist, Andrew, is that Baldoni is now suing Blake Lively and her husband Ryan Reynolds for $400 million. Baldoni alleges that this showbiz power couple and their publicist, someone called Leslie Sloan, tried to hijack his film and made false claims against him of sexual harassment. And earlier, before this, Blake Lively accused Baldoni of attempting to destroy her reputation. Where is this heading, do you think?
Well, you say it all ends with us, it doesn't. It all ends with lawyers.
It ends with the reality. Like everything. It ends with the lawyers.
Everything. And they always say a good reputation is worth more than silver or gold. It's all about this, but it started actually with accusations about behaviour on set.
Yeah, the Baldoni's behaviour.
Exactly. And all sorts of litigation. The figures are eye-watering because there was reports about what went on and PR firms saying that they were going to bury Blake's sort of reputation as a result of it, Blake's reputation, and they got involved and there were smear campaigns and so on and so forth. So it's all to do with defamation, and he's also gone as far as sort of suing the New York Times, who reported some of the allegations.
Yeah, now that you'll agree with me here. I mean, I know something of journalistic law. That lawsuit, that legal action by Baldoni against the New York Times, which all the New York Times did was to report what was in Blake Lively's lawsuit against Baldoni. That legal action is going nowhere. That's fair.
Well, you say that, and there's always an argument for the things. What Baldoni is arguing is that the bits that they picked were out of context and so on and so forth. No, but that's what happens. It is a nuance. Yeah. So if they're twisting it on that sort of basis, you're right. If you're simply reporting the facts and so on and so forth, but if you're repeating a defamatory statement, then you yourself as a publisher will be liable for the defamation. What's happening on this sort of basis? He's basically come out as a big campaigner for women's rights. He's talking about toxic masculinity and trying to get rid of all that sort of stuff. So the damage to him and his reputation is massive. He's been dropped by his agency as a result of these various accusations and so on and so forth. But the figures in the States are always huge. So to say you're suing for $400 million, you know, it's incredible. And the way that they calculate this, look, what is the damage? The basic principle in law is to put you in the position you would have been in if the defamatory statements had not been made. So basically, if he's going to argue about his career and so on and so forth. But the fact that it's all Hollywood and they've got some of the same characters as the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard cases, the PR firms behind that, the Sultans of Spin, as I call them, they're working on that sort of premise. It's all going to come out, and I predict where it's going. It's going to be pages and pages of tabloid stories for several months.
Yeah, and so Blake Lively alleged during the filming of It Ends With Us. Baldoni, as I said earlier, was not only her co-star, he also directed the film. That, for example, when she was in her trailer getting changed, he would burst in with his mates, with his buddies, so they could see her in a state of undress. He, of course, denies this.
Yes.
So she set this ball rolling with these kind of explosive allegations against Baldoni, and he has counterattacked in a massive way.
Yes.
Which is obviously, as you say, suing the New York Times. Now this $400 million lawsuit. We can talk fairly freely here. We're not under American jurisdiction. Do you think perhaps he... I've got to be slightly careful. Could you conclude that possibly Mr. Baldoni doth protest too much?
Well, I always say that the best form of defence is offence.
Yes.
So you work on that sort of principle. It all depends on the evidence, is the honest answer in all of these situations. The reports from that sort of side, apart from bursting into her trailer while she was breastfeeding, was one of the issues. There was apparently pictures which are shown of naked people. There were scenes which took place which she hadn't authorised. So
people are watching. By the way, that goes on all the time. Well, it used to when I was there. The directors would get their mates in, if there were nude scenes and things like that. But I mean, one had thought, or would have thought that, in our new woke era, Me Too and all that sort of activity had ended. But according to Blake Lively, it hasn't.
Well, and that's the thing. So looking on that sort of basis, so they talked about having an intimacy coordinator on set and so on and so forth. She sat down. The reason Ryan's involved as well is they talked about the artistic side, looking at the script and working on that sort of basis, changing some of the scenes. So this is what they're complaining about on that sort of basis. And Taylor Swift was involved as well. She was apparently shown a particular scene and said, I prefer her version of it than the other one. So she was brought in on that sort of basis.
Well, you have to do what Taylor says. I mean, for God's sake, if she preferred that scene it is.
Yes.
But also these publicists are involved, and Blake Lively said that Baldoni used his publicists. She alleges this. We're not saying this is a fact, folks. This is what these two are accusing each other of. None of this has been proved. We've got to be careful here.
Yes.
But she says that Baldoni used his publicists, his PRs, as we call them in the business, to smear her reputation.
Yes.
He is now saying that both Blake and Ryan Reynolds used their publicist to smear him.
And there's quotes, and they say alleged quotes, so you're absolutely right to frame it in that way. We can bury anybody, was one of the quotes on these sort of things, when they have these smear campaigns. And actors nowadays, they're brands.
Yeah.
And so the reputation, they're worth millions. So the knock-on effect when it's damaged, and obviously with one of the Hollywood's power couples, with Ryan Reynolds as well thrown into the mix, they're looking at that sort of basis, and that's why it's so important for these big studios. But this is why he's come out fighting, and all of the stuff will come out in evidence. We've seen some of the text, alleged texts and so on and so forth, which have been printed in the newspaper. Baldoni's turning around and saying that's not all of it, it's not in context. So we're going to see the rest of it, and it's going to be ugly.
It's like I say, it's better than any movie.
Oh,
it
absolutely.
Really is. It really is. Now let's talk again carefully a little bit about Blake Lively.
Yes.
Now, a friend of a friend over there in LA, in poor fire-ravaged LA.
Yes, awful.
She's a Scandinavian journalist, and for the what they call the opening of this film, they call them junkets.
Yes.
So I've been to many. Basically, the studios organise these junkets. So basically, loads of journalists will turn up, and the stars turn up usually in a hotel somewhere, and through the day they'll conduct all these interviews. Sometimes the poor stars have to do 30 interviews in a day, but it's a good way of getting global publicity for the movie in one day flat. Now, at one of these junkets, this Scandinavian girl, there were rumours around, or I think it might have just been announced, that Blake Lively was with child. She was pregnant, and so this Scandinavian girl, I think it was for a TV interview, quick TV interview, she said, congratulations on your baby bump. And Blake Lively went off on one.
Yes,
you know,
apparently.
Sort of basically, you know, felt that this was, you know, an intrusion on her privacy, and we're here to talk about the film, not whether or not I'm pregnant and all that. So that Scandinavian, the journalist, a female, she said, you know, she went public and just said, you know, I was bullied here, you know, and they humiliated me, and I just asked a perfectly, you know, normal, civil question. So I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, Blake Lively. Let's put this. She's one of those people who doesn't suffer fools gladly. Would that be a diplomatic way of putting it?
And it is interesting. I read that report and read all sorts of other reports as well on that sort of basis. And some of the allegations about what was said on set was about her weight and whether she was carrying too much weight and so on and so forth. So clearly very sensitive about it. There are always different ways that you can spin these stories. And as you know, and you work on that sort of basis, in the same way as Amber Heard was vilified in the press and so on and so forth. And that's why I say some of the PR people, the sultans of spin, behind the scenes, they will twist and turn and so on and so forth. And some of the emails, alleged text, which went between the people, are quite horrendous about burying and basically vilifying people in this sort of situation. It will come out in the wash. It will come out with lots of lawyers. I always say it's the lawyers who benefit most in these actions. And that's what's going to happen. But it's the evidence. That's the key thing to do.
Have you ever worked in America, but legally?
I work. My wife's American, so I've worked around the world. So a lot of what I do, but I mainly specialise in intellectual property. So that's why I sell rights around the world on that sort of basis. But yes, it's interesting. The lawyers over there are a slightly different breed to the lawyers over here.
Yeah, mostly they tend to be much wealthier.
Well, you look at the figures, and it's exactly 400 million. And I always talk about litigation. There's that classic cartoon, Jay Bright, from the 18th century, which depicts litigation as a cow with the word litigation on it, and you get the plaintiff pulling the horns, the defendant ppulling the tail, and the lawyers milking it, because they're the ones who make all the money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems to me, I don't know, you know, the only winners here will be the lawyers.
And it's also the reputational damage, because what comes out, the dirt on all sides. You shine a spotlight on people's lives. That's what they're now going to be doing. They're going to be looking at all these old emails, digging up, as you say, interviews with Swedish journalists who said this and so on and so forth. And if you remember the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case, which was wall-to-wall television, everybody was trying to fix it because they loved all the dirt. And that's what's going to happen.
Well, you know, I've got a lot of experience having, you know, been a journalist in LA for the best part of 10 years and gone to a lot of these junkets, interviewed a lot of stars. And these publicists, you know, they're the scourge of journalism there. So basically you'll be going into some star, some actor or actress who's just filed for some sensational divorce, and as you go into the room with the actor or the actress sitting there, the publicist will say, "You're not allowed to ask about the divorce." And you go, "Well, it's the only question in town." And I'll tell you, Blake Lively's next movie, all the journalists will be banned from asking her about Baldoni, Justin Baldoni, and same for him. You won't be able to ask him about Blake Lively, probably for the rest of their lives.
Well, I think that's probably the reality. But I reckon there's a movie just in the same way there was behind the scenes.
Do you know what? They probably will make a movie of this. Look, we're going to go to break now, and we're going to pick Mr. Eborn's legal brain again. We're going to talk about the BBC's favourite killer drill rapper, Jake Farry. He's the guy that the BBC played a record of on their channel, what's it called, BBC One Extra. And the song was all about killing someone, and you know what they say? They say, write about what you know. Well, Jake Farry knows about killing people because he did kill someone. He went to jail. We'll discuss what's happened to Jake in the... subsequent in the last few days. It's quite a lot after these messages. Stay exactly where you are.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm still with, of course, Pete Barnes. What was it you're called? A jabbering
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Jibberjaws.
It doesn't mean I'm wrong.
I'm still with Jibberjaws, Pete Barnes. He does go on, doesn't he?
Yeah, because I'm right, that's why.
Yeah, of course you are. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Tory's going to win the next election.
Yeah. Reform going to win the next election. Tell me a good
they are. That's right, dear.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Right, let's get back to the business that we're supposed to be dealing with. And we're still with Andrew Eborn, barrister. Have you ever lost a case, by the way?
It's funny you should mention that, Kevin. I've never lost a case.
He's never lost a case. He's never lost a case, but he doesn't like to talk about it.
I don't like to talk about it.
Even I know that.
Well, of course. He shouts it from the rooftops 24/7.
But in a posh voice.
You only win your cases because you've got a posh voice.
I think that's right. It's very good.
Well, there's not many working class barristers, are there?
There's a few, actually.
Yeah. I wouldn't hire one. Keir Starmer, he's the son of a toolmaker. He doesn't like talking about that either.
Very true.
So it took me some research to find out his father was a toolmaker, I'll tell you. Now, let's talk. This is an interesting legal conundrum, if you like. So there's this guy called Jake Fari. Back in 2008, he got a life sentence. For killing a poor little kid, 16-year-old, well, I say little, he was a massive kid, he was called a gentle giant, 16-year-old Jimmy Misen. Basically, Jake Fari picked a fight on him in a bakery in South London. It all got out of hand, and this guy, Fari, threw a hot Pyrex dish full of sausages at him. It hit him in the neck and severed his artery. He died. He got life imprisonment for that, quite rightly, if you ask me. Anyway, as in the nature of these things, his life sentence turned out to be about 15 years, you know. So he went in 2008, came out in June 2023, on licence, of course. Now, since then, he fancies himself as a drill rapper. The BBC played his song, Dirty Game, and DJ Theo Johnson on BBC One Extra gushed, he really stands out. Well, the lyrics were all about, like, watching a man's soul, and I gashed him and there he went and dead. It was all a graphic description of Fari murdering Jimmy Misen. That was what this song was about, so the BBC should never have played it. They had the temerity to say, oh, well, you know, we have very strict editorial guidelines and policies before we let any content out. What they should have done is said, we made a mistake here, sorry, because that's what they did. But that's the BBC for you. So the BBC played this record. His mother, Margaret Misen, was very upset about that, as you might imagine. Anyway, the point is that since being released, Mr. Fari, piece of scum that he is, part of his licences was A, he wasn't allowed into the London Borough of Greenwich, and B, he must not talk about his crime. He must not boast about it. So, A, his song Dirty Game completely glorifies and boasts about his crime, his horrible murder of poor Jimmy. And B, he made a video for it in the London Borough of Greenwich. So we're not talking super criminal, are we here? He's thick as a brick, clearly. Anyway, so Jimmy's mum said, well, look, I've just looked at this video. This was only yesterday. And the authorities looked at that and said, well, that breaks the terms. Oh, have you seen this song? That breaks the terms. Mr. Fari is now back in jail. Yes. He's been recalled to prison, so serves him right for being such an idiot. Now, what I would like to say to you, or ask you, Andrew, is this. A lot of people said, look, this guy, awful murder. You know, life sentence, great. Why was the life sentence only 15 years? And now that he's been recalled, now that he rode roughshod over the terms of his very generous, lenient release, can he now do life?
So it's very simple, and what happens is that I always say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and trust in the judiciary and the legal system was at an all-time low, which is one of the reasons they introduced the televisation of the sentencing.
Yeah.
And so judges could explain.
By the way, don't they go on when they're filmed?
But
I've seen them doing these sentences. You have too, in real life. Trust me, that it's never as long as when they're on telly.
And what they're trying to do, though, is to explain to the system, and it's actually a formula. The Sentencing Council says that this is what you're trying to do, here's what you do for these cases, and murder is always life. Yeah. But what you do is you get what's called aggravating circumstances, which means that you have a minimum period, which might be a higher period if it's aggravating. Mitigating circumstances means it's lower. In this particular case, they said you've got 14 years. You have to serve your 14 years. But you then get let out, as you rightly say, on what's called licence. Now, what licence means, you're still serving your life sentence, but you're in the community and supposed to be rehabilitating and so on and so forth. If you breach the terms of those licence, you get recalled back to prison. So you're absolutely right on that sort of basis. What happened here in those two examples, he went to the borough, he recorded that, he clearly wasn't supposed to do that, and the abhorrent lyrics that we heard, and you mentioned some of them, seeing blood spilled, same floor he was left on, watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah, sorry, watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's.
Sickening lyrics.
And then see the soul come out of him.
Absolutely
He was
sickening.
glorifying his horrible murder of that poor kid.
Sickening.
So he boasted about it.
And my heart goes out to the mother and so on and so on, and the family and friends who are just reminded of this. It's absolutely appalling. But it beggars another question, because rap songs, in and of itself, he's not the first rap person who's got criminal convictions. There's a number of rappers who have this. And if you look at the lyrics about women, about murders, about drugs and so on and so forth, there's a lot of those in these songs. And what the BBC would say is they're turning around, they say they didn't play that song, but they didn't know about his convictions when he was called 10, and they played it. They've now taken them off the playlist, so they won't do that again. And they also say that it's absolutely appalling. But it does raise that.
They should apologise.
Well, they should turn around and say, it's simple to say sorry and say, look, we're sorry for the offence.
We made a mistake, is what they should say. I mean, you know, the drill rap, I mean, it's got some pretty, they should have looked at the lyrics, but, you know, we all know what drill rap is about. But they didn't, and they didn't know about Jake Farry's background, so to a certain extent, those are mitigating circumstances. But to start saying, their response was, Pete, see what you think about this, their response was, we have very strict guidelines and editorial policies before we put any content out. Well, you didn't this time, did you?
No, you didn't. And the boilerplate excuses just don't work here, because for me, actually, what I think this is the BBC like to elevate these kind of subcultures and these underground things, and to kind of speculate, kind of make them more significant and really shine a light on them. And I think that's what this was. You know, this drill culture is its own kind of subgenre, and it is people who don't really understand it trying to understand it and just making a complete mess of it. I think he's right that you should just apologise. I don't, but it should just be automatic for them to apologise.
But I think it's wider than that, though. I think it's wider than that, because if you look at the lyrics for a lot of these songs, they're all about the same thing.
Yeah.
And a number of rappers,
people.
but they are, and a lot of rappers have got criminal convictions. You look at that sort of stuff. So the question has to be, in this society, is it right? I mean, we've got to balance freedom of speech with incitement and causing offence and so on and so forth. That's the bigger question which we need to look at.
I think you're right. Sorry.
But I want to ask this, though. You know, what a lot of people are annoyed about is, you know, we hear, oh, you got life. Like you killed a kid, your life imprisonment. You know, some of them are back on the streets in 12 years, sometimes less. This guy, back on the streets in just under 15 years. He's still only 35 years old, whole life ahead of him and all that. So people get very angry about that.
And
it's deceptive. You know, it's stopped now, but for a long, long time, every sentence... so you go, tough on crime. This man is getting 20 years. You are sentenced to 20 years. What that meant was he was sentenced to 10 years. All sentences were automatically halved, and yet for some reason the legal system wanted to tell, look at us, 20 years. No, 10 years. So there's this deception. He's getting life. No, he's on the streets 8 years later. This guy on the streets just under 15 years later. So what I'm asking you, Andrew, given that he has ridden roughshod over his very lenient early release, could he do life now, please?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and this is about the optics on this sort of side. We need to restore trust in the justice system, and as I said, but the punishments, they always work on this basis. Some of it's to punish for the crime. It's supposed to act as a deterrent for other people, but also they're looking at rehabilitation of the offender. And this particular person was 19 when they murdered the terrible murder in Lee, as you mentioned. The question is, in normal situations, they want to try and see, can this person be rehabilitated? Which is why, that's why they sue it. And they then turn around and say, okay, after a certain period of time, we'll try to reintroduce you to society, but you're on licence, so if you do anything again, you're back in. And I think that's right. What we need is the public need to understand why this happens. You need to restore the trust and make sure that appropriate sentences are carried out.
Yeah, well, this guy, while he was still inside, there were allegations that he tried to sexually assault a nurse while he wasn't very well in the hospital, apparently. So, you know, there are other questions about why the hell they decided to let him out at all in the first place. So this is very, very murky. But Andrew, thank you very much. A very interesting half an hour on two legal cases, intriguing legal cases on both sides of the Atlantic. So thank you very much to the non-working class barrister and broadcaster, Andrew Eborn. Thank you very much to Andrew and